The iPod Touch was a device for those who didn't need a phone but still wanted a piece of the iOS experience. Come 2012, and the iPod had its last major update, where it gained a new design, a better camera, better processor, and a multitude of color options to appeal to everyone. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're going to be talking about the iPod Touch 5th generation. How does it hold up in 2019, and is it obsolete? Before we get into this, make sure you go follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, because honestly I don't have a lot of followers and it makes me cry at night, so go check me out at 91_tech, direct links below. But getting back into this, to quickly answer the question of obsolescence, yes, this iPod is indeed obsolete, but don't feel too bad. It had a pretty long life, being updated all the way to iOS 9 and being able to download most apps until late 2018. Considering the hardware it packed, it's really impressive it stayed supported for so long, even if it shouldn't have, but I'll get into that in a bit. First, let's just look at the iPod Touch 5 as is and talk about the design. Frankly, this is probably the best part of the device. It surprisingly doesn't look too out of place in today's world. It's super thin, light, and sleek. It is small with only a 4-inch display, but the screen is Retina and looks really good, so at least there's that. The home button might look old, and that's because it isn't rocking Apple's Touch ID. If you want to protect your information from the world, you'll actually have to set a passcode the old-fashioned way. You might be wondering what this silver little button is on the back, and the answer is something you'll probably never ever use. When you press it, it pops out so you can attach something called the iPod Touch Loop, and although I don't have one, this is what it looks like. Apple thought people might use the iPod to replace their old digital cameras. Keep in mind, not everyone and their grandmothers had smartphones yet in 2012, and the loop would serve as a kind of wrist strap for it. This wasn't an awful idea, but even at the time, the iPod had a pretty mediocre camera, and the loop ended up falling flat. Apple would not continue it in the next iPod Touch. Moving to the bottom of the phone, we have a headphone jack, as well as the lightning charger port. This was actually new to the iPod 5. All iPods beforehand had the 30-pin charging port instead. It's kind of funny, I remember everyone hating the lightning port at first because all their old chargers wouldn't work, but that line of thought hasn't aged well, as these chargers turned out to be a million times better than the old one. We have quite a few colors with this iPod. Obviously this one is silver, but if you're looking around, you'll also see space gray, pink, yellow, blue, and a special edition red, although those can be a bit tougher to find. Technically, there was also a black and slate version of this iPod, which is darker than the space gray, but in 2013 Apple updated it to a lighter space gray. So if you're getting a space gray 5th generation iPod, you'll know that it was made in 2013 or later. We also have all sorts of storage sizes with this iPod, and it actually gets a bit confusing here, so I'll quickly go over it. The original came out in either 32 gigs or 64. This was an iPod after all, and so having more space for music made sense. But then, midway through 2013, Apple also released a 16GB model that lacked a back camera, although it still had a front-facing one for FaceTime or whatever. These models only came in silver and were launched so Apple could officially kill off the 4th generation iPod from their line, but still have a cheaper option for those who needed one. Alright, I guess that wasn't that complicated. Eventually these models would all be replaced by the iPod Touch 6th generation that was quietly launched in mid-2015 with slightly different colors and upgraded internals. The 6th generation iPod is somehow still being sold on Apple's website in 2019, so if you want to see a review of that iPod, I'll leave a link in the description below. As mentioned before, Apple is really pushing the camera of this iPod, with digital cameras beginning to become a thing of the past, and so it made sense that the relatively cheap iPod could take their place. Apple knew iPods weren't just for music anymore, with iOS being a thing, so why couldn't they also be a good camera? And I think this line of thought might have worked better if Apple had actually put a good camera in this thing. Instead, they only gave it 5 megapixels and up to 1080p video recording, although calling it 1080 seems like a stretch to me. The iPhone 4S, released a full year before, featured 8 megapixels and was actually able to take pretty darn good photos, especially for the time. Had Apple put that camera in this iPod, I think it would have benefited it greatly, but sadly they didn't. I'll show some photos in a moment, but first let's briefly touch on the selfie camera. It also is pretty lackluster with only 1.2 megapixels. It isn't going to take a good or even okay selfie, and you shouldn't expect much from it. Back in the day though, it was fine for FaceTime, which is what most people used it for, so I don't think it was a big deal. Fast forward 7 years, however, and it certainly hasn't aged well. But all that being said, here's some photos and video for you to see for yourself. This is being filmed on the iPod Touch 5th generation. And, well, it doesn't look good. So far, the iPod 5 actually doesn't sound that bad. Great design, sure, mediocre camera, but honestly, it could be worse, right? Well, unfortunately, it is worse, with some awful technical specifications that have really held it back. While this iPod was supported all the way until late 2016 with iOS 9.3.5, it is extremely slow, and even the most basic of tasks can be a huge pain. This iPod here might not look so bad right now, but keep in mind that this is a fresh iPod that was recently restored and has nothing on it. So this is about as fast as it'll ever be. The A5 processor and half gigabyte of RAM is what did this iPod in around the iOS 8 times, with even 7 starting to make it feel slow. It suffered the same fate as the iPhone 4S and iPad 2, the specs just couldn't keep up with the intensity of Apple's software. I did a whole video on this last year, and although I'm not super happy about how it turned out in the end, it still goes over how Apple killed these products pretty well. I'll put a link in the description if you're interested, and maybe I'll redo it at some point. Actually, really quickly here, I'm gonna put up a vote. If you'd like me to kind of redo that video and fix a few things, a couple mistakes I made, just vote yes on the card above, and if no, you can vote no. I don't have to or anything. I definitely don't want to make it look like I'm just milking it, so I'll leave that one up to you guys. iOS 9.3.5 runs terribly on the iPod, but not all is lost, as it can actually use relatively recent versions of most apps. Things like YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram don't feel too outdated on here, and so as slow as they are, that is a decent benefit. However, if you have one of these iPods, you still probably aren't using it for these things, as you could just do them on your smartphone and it would be way better. Which begs the question, what can you still do with this iPod? Or to better phrase this, what should you do with this iPod? Maybe you have an old one lying around or are considering picking one up for cheap on eBay. Well, shockingly, music is actually something you can do on this iPod. I know music on an iPod is an absurd concept, but it isn't a bad device for that. If you have Spotify Premium, you can download all your songs onto it and not have to use your data on your phone in the car. Maybe you have a ton of songs bought from iTunes. I know some people still do that. That's just a couple use cases, but hopefully you get the idea. Other than music, the iPod could be good enough for maybe a young child. There are some basic games that'll play fine on it, and you can also still text with iMessage as long as you have a Wi-Fi connection. So again, that might work for kids who aren't quite old enough for a phone yet, but you'd still like to keep in contact with. I think it's safe to say the iPod Touch 5th generation is obsolete in 2019. It's slow, unsupported, and most suffer from awful battery life due to them being very well used over the years, and for most people, these iPods will likely live out the rest of their lives in the junk drawer. Kind of sad, but that's just how technology works. Still, the iPod was great in 2012, and the design it brought was a really solid upgrade from its predecessor. But what do you think about this iPod? Did you have one when you were younger, or even still to this day? Let me know in the comments down below. It's always fun to see people's experiences with these older pieces of tech. If you found this video interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you want some more tech in your life. And with that all being said, I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.